and welcome to Movie Menu Classics, your go-to podcast for classic cinema. We're your hosts. I'm Heather.
I'm Vasthi.
And today on this episode, we'll be discussing sci-fi thrillers, two of our favorites. How are you doing today, Vasthi? I haven't seen you in a while.
I'm good. How are you? I'm excited to talk about these.
I know. I've been so excited. I watched them a while ago, and I have been dying to discuss them. So let's start with your movie because it came out first. And you tell us all about it, Metropolis.
Sure. The first film we'll be discussing is Metropolis, released on March 13th, 1927, directed by the famous Fritz Lang, written by Thea von Harber. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing her name. Based on the novel Metropolis by the same person. Here's the plot. In a futuristic city sharply divided between the working class and the city planners, the son of the city's mastermind falls in love with a working class prophet who predicts the coming of a savior to mediate their differences. I'd say that's a really accurate description of the film. It sounds a little weird, talking about prophets and saviors and whatnot, but I love this film. I feel it's so influential artistically, just in so many things that we've seen in recent times and recent being, after 1950 or so. Also starring Alfred Abel, Gustav Frohlich, Rudolf Klein-Roeg, and Fritz Rasp, which I do have an issue with IMDb omitting Bridget Helm, who is easily the star of this film. So I don't know who I have to talk to at IMDb about that, but I digress. So before I go into some of the little known facts or trivia about this film, I'm going to go into just sharing a couple of facts of what was going on around 1927. Charles Lindbergh made his famous nonstop transatlantic flight solo. The Jazz Singer was the first synchronized sound feature-length film, thus ending the silent era. The Food and Drug and Insecticide Administration was formed, and the first electronic TV image was transmitted. So that's a little sign of the times what was being developed. Heather, what did you think of this film? Which version of this film did you watch?
So I watched the extended version. I was looking it up when I first went to go watch this because I'll get back to this in a second, but I don't know how. I have never seen this movie. Put a pin in that for a second. But yes. So I was trying to figure out what to watch, right? And so it was like Metropolis or Metropolis Extended, which is like 2.5 hours almost, just shy. And I was reading, the very beginning of it. Yeah. It explains that in like 2009, I think it was, they found, or 2008, they found missing footage from when they originally screened it in like Buenos Aires or something.
Which I find a little hilarious based on like all the, the urban legends of like Nazis escaping to Argentina. And then we're like, I saw them like, of course they found it in Argentina.
And this film blew my mind. Because and I think any film buff or someone who's into movies or just, I really think that you have to watch this just for the history of cinema, because this was groundbreaking. There's things in this that I'm not even quite sure how they did with the technology and filmmaking, like, and I was the whole time, and I went back and watched some things too, like trying to figure out what was practical. There was a lot of, they built massive sets. Like, oh my goodness, mind-boggling. I'm hoping maybe you know how much money they put into this, but also I was trying to figure out what was like miniatures, and just they and like the electricity, because there's different times when there's like an electricity special effects. Like, how did they do that?
Right.
1927, and then there were just. This was obviously the grandfather of all of sci-fi, like, anything you can think of, Blade Runner, just anything. And also as a little bit into the video game world, Final Fantasy,
Ah,
particularly
okay.
Final Fantasy 7. I don't know if you know anything about the Final Fantasy series, but Final Fantasy 7, and then I'm not a huge video game person, but I live
Yeah.
with one. So by proxy, I have learned a lot. Okay.
Right.
But Final Fantasy 7, they just put out a remake recently, and it's gorgeous. I played like the demo of it, which was really
Mm-hmm.
fun, but it's literally like the rich and wealthy live on the upper part of the world, and then the workers live underneath in the working
Oh,
city,
so
and there's like a power plant that's what they work at. I mean, it's literally
this.
this. Yeah, obviously directly inspired by Metropolis. So it and oh, speaking of that, Final Fantasy music just in general across
Mm-hmm.
the entire series is fantastic. Like
Okay.
absolutely fantastic. And someone on YouTube, there's only like 45 views and like 3 of them are ours. Somebody went and scored this entire extended version with Final Fantasy music, and it is absolutely stunning.
Seriously.
Yeah, they did an amazing job. Like just Google, or like not Google, but on YouTube, look up Metropolis Final Fantasy.
Okay.
And even if you don't watch the whole thing, maybe skip through it for like the epic scenes, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely the scene where she dances
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah.
club. The music for that is just
I'm gonna have to check
amazing.
that out. And
It's so cool.
and after we'll see if we can put that link on the website just to guide viewers to that, because
Yeah, and
I definitely want to check that out. I'm not a video game person, but any kind of fan created uh improvement
yeah, and
hardly
it's
ever disappoint, and I'm all about that kind of creativity, so I'm
I
for it.
mean, the original score for this film was great, but honestly, like some of the things, the Final Fantasy version, I was like, man, whoever did this, like, good on you, because it
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
great. They put time and effort into it, and I really think people need to take the time to check it out because it's great.
Going back
So
to
I
your
could
point,
go ahead.
what you said about every film buff needs to see it. I'm constantly surprised how many people that either went to film school or studied some film or work in the film industry haven't watched this. I don't know if it's because of accessibility or it's just one of those things maybe you thought you saw and didn't. So a couple of people I've introduced this to, they thought they did see it, and they're like, no, actually, I just heard of it.
By the way,
Some of the
it's free
imagery.
on YouTube. Like
Oh,
I
no
watched
way.
it on Amazon.
Yeah.
I like rented it for $2.99 or whatever. But then when we were so excited about the Final Fantasy stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
we went looking around for other people that have connected the two. We found the whole version. Just I don't know how, if it's bootlegged or what, but it's the same quality as on Amazon, and it was free on YouTube. Not to
Okay, that's
like
good to know.
rat
Yeah, I
anybody
saw
out, but
it. I saw it. I
there.
saw it on Amazon. I embarrassingly was unaware of the 2008 the complete film remaster. I saw this in college. Is actually I found a postcard at the library, and I love it's the the robot and the city in the background, and I bought this
Yeah.
postcard when I was in high school, and I loved it. And so when I finally came across it at the library, this was around 2001 when that got remastered. I adored it, but I had no idea how much of it was missing. So when you see the 2008 version, don't get discouraged by the time, because you think like 2.5 hours of a silent film. Oh my god! For me, anyway, it went by so quickly. This isn't like deleted scenes. Like every scene that's included moves the story along. And one of the first things I said to my husband as soon as I finished, I'm like, I can't even remember the previous version that I saw. Like, what chopped up mess did I see? But I still liked it. And this one's just, it's the closest to the complete version that the Berliners saw back in 27. Because
Yeah.
interestingly enough, excuse me, the film had to be cut because it was so long. The theaters were losing money because you could only show it so many times a day. So in order to make some money abroad, they had to cut it up so they could show it more times a day, more people could watch it. So I found that really interesting that it was an intentional cut, based on profit. Really, it wasn't that. Um, it wasn't because of artistic reasons. That was my understanding of it. So
That makes a lot of sense. I just to jump in real quick.
mhm,
I feel like movies have gotten shorter and shorter over
mhm,
time. Like we're used to like this 90-minute like in and out, and we're like, oh my god, it was 2 hours or 2.5 hours, or oh, like God forbid 3 hours, right? But then you think back to older movies and they were epics. They were like an event. There were intermissions,
mhm.
and you just made me realize that it was for profit. Like they cut them so
So you
they
could
could
show
show it
more,
more
yeah.
times. And that's sad to the art of filmmaking, and audiences' attention spans have gotten shorter and shorter, but it's
But
the way
isn't
of the
it
world.
something of how we can talk about a classic film that's 2.5 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and many of our friends' eyes glaze over. But then you talk about, hey, what show did you binge watch for 8 hours? People rattle off shows all the time. Oh, I spent my Sunday blowing through season 2 and 3 of whatever. So it's just weird. It's a weird relationship we have with time, with the concept of time. How we can sit still for 8 hours watching TV that's broken up into episodes. But when it comes to like a 3 hour film, people start to like get restless. And I hope with this podcast we can help bring back the love of the epic, of the
Yeah. And
uh,
I have to say, honestly, when I went to look this up, I went, oh my God, two and a
I
half
did too.
hours
I totally
of
did
a
too.
silent film. What is she doing to me? And that's sad. The sad fact about classic movies, black and white movies specifically, today's audiences, and I find myself doing it sometimes, and
Hmm.
I'm guilty of it. But I definitely, when I talk to people, and you're talking about people's eyes glazing over, you mention a black and white film, and they're just like, oh my god, it's gonna be so boring. And there's just like this like daunting, like, okay, like it's a task you have to go complete. And then and every once in a while I have that someone wants me to watch something and I'm going, oh, okay. But then I always am amazed at how good it is, or reminded how good something is. So I always say, like, give classic films a chance, because they're not these boring, awful things you think of. If they were awful, they wouldn't have survived to now, where people are still caring to watch them.
I agree. Um, so to begin, so if you've listened to our other episodes, I always like to start out with naming what Oscars they were or weren't nominated for, which ones they won. So for the Oscar buffs out there, you know that the first Academy Award ceremony wasn't until 1929. And even then, the first foreign film category wasn't created until 1956. So this film had no chance at anything. Well, number one, because the ceremony wasn't created, but even if it had, uh, it was a German film and it wouldn't have been recognized right off the bat. So that was something that I had to think about, because immediately I'm like, how is this not nominated for anything? Oh, because it wasn't created yet. So yeah, so another interesting thing about these films is like, or this film in particular, so the found frames are in such bad shape that it cuts away from like the remastered, cleaned up scenes, and then you'll see it's very obvious where they added the extra frames.
And the
And
remastered part of the film is amazingly
flawless.
clear. Like it's HD. It's like you went to film something now and decided to
They're
film it in black and white.
Yeah, and then just makeup department did a period piece.
Yeah.
So getting into the meat of this film. So one last thing actually. So what you were saying about like black and white film, people kind of getting like, oh Lord. There's a tendency of that happening with foreign films, something that you have to read subtitles. And I feel you've got like a double whammy with this one, because it's a silent film. So you can't even like pretend to pay attention to the tones of the voices. Like you have no choice but to sit and read the cards, see what's happening. That's part of for me, it's a charm and a challenge of a silent film, is that you can't have it in the background. You have to pay attention to this. And it's worth it, in my opinion. So for Fritz Lang, he was surprised that Hitler was a huge fan of this film. And I was actually surprised to find that out too. When I guess when you think about some of the themes of the story, I'm like, oh, I guess I could see how he liked it. But it came to a surprise to him. And something really disturbing that was offered to Fritz upon the release of this film is that he was offered to be made an honorary Aryan despite being Jewish, which wasn't done often, but they would make the Weimar Republic would make exceptions, and they were willing to make an exception for him. He was married to the writer of this film, and she was a huge Nazi sympathizer. So he left Germany and eventually left to the United States, divorced his wife, and had to leave that life behind. And I couldn't believe that when I read that. Like, I can't even imagine being offered something like that and seeing how scary it must have been to see how the country was changing right after World War I, and, you know, going into the rise of the Nazi Party, and then being offered this exception to, you know, it's a huge project.
You know, it actually, it makes sense that Hitler loved this film, because I was reading, what's her name? Bridget Helm, the lead,
The actress, yeah.
the actress. Her performance was fantastic. She plays like 5 characters in this film, and it is amazing how well she did. And she's even playing like her main character, and then like
A fantasy character, and
right,
yeah,
and they're completely different. Even though, I mean, they're just like she was 18 when she did this, by the way, and now she was married. She married a Jewish man, so she actually ended up leaving the film industry because.
And that's why we never saw her again. Yeah, because at 18,
she
19,
had a really big career for a few years, and then she had to leave. She quit the film industry because she was so upset that it was being overrun by the Nazi Party. Now she got into some legal trouble. She got into a car accident, and there was like manslaughter charges. And you know who made them go away? Hitler.
Wow.
He must have been a super fan, and she was gorgeous, so I don't know, maybe he had a thing.
It sounds like he was a total fanboy for this film, which is weird because when you hear of like who this film influenced, and there's so many shots, like the shot that is in your background, for those of you who are just listening, Heather has the background of one of the factory scenes, and
like,
it, to me,
machine.
It reminds me honestly of like Bob Fosse, the Cell Block Tango, kind of like I've seen this choreographed in dance films before, where they're just kind of, it's very machine-like choreography, and I'm like, I've seen this shot before.
It's also so steampunk, and it just this movie is the seed of so many genres you don't even know. You need to watch this movie.
Okay, one thing I have to address immediately for pop culture and comic book nerds. So yes, this film was the influence for Superman, for the city that Superman protects, Metropolis. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who are the creators of Superman, definitely have cited that they named the city after this film. And for the famous robot scene that's in so many of the movie posters, I hadn't seen it in a while. I'm like, this has to have been an influence for George Lucas and C-3PO. And yeah, I looked it up, and absolutely, this was 100% the influence for C-3PO. For any of the Star Wars fans, you'll see it immediately. There's no denying it. So right now that you bring up Bridget Helm, I read that she did all of her own stunts. They hired a stunt double to have her walk around in the in the robot suit, and there's some, crazy stunts that she has to like run in the dark and run into walls
or her like
and
hanging from
hanging
that
from the
bell and
bell.
getting pulled back onto the balcony, which looked like it hurt. There were
Yeah.
some scenes in this film where I'm wondering how many people were injured in those giant crowd scenes, which by the way, they had hundreds of extras. And I kept thinking, because you'd see like the socialites and then you'd see the workers, and I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
it's the same set of extras wearing different costumes. But then at some point, everyone comes together and I'm like, holy cow,
I don't
there's
think so.
literally
Yeah.
hundreds of extras. I mean, this film is literally an epic. It is mind-boggling. I had no idea. So thank you
It's
for,
Oh,
for having
absolutely.
me watch it.
I'm really excited that you enjoyed it. So it's not to say that it was the very first epic of this magnitude. Like you see like problematic films like Birth of a Nation or The Hunchback of Notre Dame. They've Films had already been attempted at a grand scale with hundreds of extras. I think the 1924 version of Ben-Hur took place a couple years before this. So Hollywood, or I shouldn't say Hollywood, but the film industry was no stranger to the large extra. It was familiar with the grand scale of having a lot of extras, but I feel this just took it to an entirely new level that we that just revolutionized science fiction. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was the world's first science fiction film, like categorically. I read some of the numbers have been padded over the years, where I think the legend might have surpassed the truth, but some would say up to 37,000 extras were used in some of these sequences, because it took over a year and a half to film. And anybody who's in the film industry can just imagine how painstakingly frustrating it must have been to film, because there's a lot of water scenes, there's a lot of costume changes, there's a lot of.
Well, and the extras are so well synchronized that obviously took a lot of takes and a lot of rehearsal and a lot of coordination. And, in this case, it's probably easier that it was a silent film because someone was obviously yelling instructions over crowd noises, like
Right.
everybody do this and everybody do that. Also, I got a lot of like Frankenstein vibes, which I was
Yes.
thinking for a second. I was like, okay, this inspired Mary Shelley, and then I was like, wait a second, no. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein way before, in like 1818. So
Yeah.
they were actually inspired by
By them.
Frankenstein, which is really cool. And then when you watch it, it's just like, oh wow, it's literally like walking into Dr. Frankenstein's lab. And this is even before the word or concept robot is created. They literally call her Machine Man. And I mean, Isaac Asimov created the term robot in like what, the 50s? I might be wrong with that, but he was the one that created that word. It didn't exist yet. This is the birth of science fiction film.
I
It's
love it. It's the other thing. So, like on the production side, so I don't work in the film industry, although I do know several people who do work in it. So I hear some of the stories of how the hours go, what it takes to the different set pieces, what it takes to get just one scene to be completed. And all I could think of is, with the thousands and thousands of extras that are being used, this is all pre-labor laws. I have no idea what the hours of these poor people, what they're going through. And this is Depression era Germany. This is after World War One. So even there's several scenes with starving kids in the slum city, and they
yeah,
said
and
that
I was
unemployment was so bad that producers had no trouble finding malnourished kids for some of these scenes.
I was actually nervous during the scenes with the kids and the water, because
Yes.
I was like, how many people actually got injured or trampled or drowned. I mean, I don't know what happened, but I was nervous for the extras during this film because they were
It's
so into
intense.
it. They were like breaking things, like these extras went all out, and this is before, you know, the beginning of learning how to do like stage combat or like stunts. Like people just did the things. You know, you think about who was in the general, what's his name, Buster Keaton, you know,
Oh
or
yeah, yeah,
Charlie
yeah.
Chaplin, like them doing their own stunts. Like these people were in nuts. Like brilliantly insane. And I don't know, I was nervous for these children and these extras.
I hope this isn't, you know, just propaganda that was thrown out to make people like us feel better. But I did read that Fritz has said several times that he did take care of those kids. Like they were fed, you know, twice a day, had X amount of hours. They were well taken care of, and I would like to believe that that's true with the children. Like at least the adults, you know, not that I'm again, I just can't imagine the type of hours that were required of these extras in the conditions that, you know, I don't know what the sound studios were like. I imagine they were freezing. I read one of the scenes. So there's a lot of biblical imagery in this. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
scenes where the son is imagining the machine as kind of like this I would say like an Egyptian Jewish kind of slave imagery where they're just kind of like tied together, bald, marching. I read that scene was so cold that Fritz was obsessively trying to get it right, that people on the side had to intervene and be like, "You got your shot. Like enough. Everyone's freezing. You got it. Like stop." So I could see how this took a year and a half to make, if not longer, you know, with pre and post production and everything that comes with that primitive style of technology. You know, it's
Yeah, they
brand new at
literally
that
had to
time.
cut the film and splice it
Paste it.
together.
It's
Yeah, the painstaking work. And I noticed in a couple scenes people's breath, like the vapor from their
yeah.
breath. Like I was like, man, it was really cold, because that is not smoke. That is, and some of the scenes there's like haze, and I don't think that was. I think that was literally like heat off of bodies.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
I so one of the party scenes where like the rich people are having a grand old time, which I actually really love that scene because I feel it's one of the few films that accurately shows what the 1920s were about, of the, you know, the few that did get to party during the jazz age. It wasn't everybody. It was a very, very small percentage who got to have the Gatsby life. And so when they showed the few people that were in those scenes, I read that a lot of the actors were complaining about their costumes. It just wasn't warm enough for that scene, especially when all the workers come together and clash with the rich folk. It was insanely cold. So I'm sure there were several cases of hyperthermia, and seeing that Hitler was such a huge fan of this film, I wouldn't be surprised if it was found that there were several other injuries or, you know, medical issues for the actors and extras that were just kind of hidden away. So if anybody knows more about this film, please send those facts our way, because I'm fascinated by this film. So with the city shot, so behind me, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, I read that it was all created as stop motion photography. So none of that was, you know, model scale. It wasn't filmed in real time. It was just every frame was shot and then just kind of put together with the plane and the cars. And
Was it, so it was a model? It wasn't. I mean,
yes,
it
it was a
must have
model.
been. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, do you know if it was miniature, or did they build like? Because a part of me thought some of the scenes were, if you think about like Broadway shows, especially like
Mm-hmm.
old school ones where they built like flats, or even some movies, like if you think about Brigadoon, like they obviously did that on a
Right.
soundstage. I was thinking they did that for some of this stuff.
I
Do
want
you
to
know if this was
say
like a miniature?
I think the scene in the big city shots, I think those were miniature, and that was what was used for stop motion. And again, whoever knows if that's correct or not, please let us know. I think what you're talking about, like with the flat um facades, I think that was like the city. The city
Like the worker
undergird.
city,
Yes.
yeah, like they're like the city or the center of the city with like the bell or the gong or whatever
Yeah,
it
I
is,
think
and
that
then
was what you were talking about.
like on a stage
Hmm.
practical.
Also, something I should have mentioned at the very beginning is that this film takes place in the year 2026. So we're only a couple years away from this. So,
That's
I
right.
mean,
I was like, and they, so I know it came out in 27, but they must have meant to release it in 26.
to be
It's
like
like
exactly
100.
100 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's fast. I love old science fiction movies, uh, and their version of what history is going to be. Even like Back to the Future.
Hmm.
I loved like the
Oh,
second
what
film.
2015 was going to be? Yeah.
Yeah, which I remember this is like way a tangent, but I was so excited because I watched all the Back to the Future movies, all three of them on October 21st, which was Wednesday, October 21st, 2015. And Dr.
That's
Brown's like,
cool.
it's Wednesday, October 21st, 2015. I was like, oh my God, it is. I was so excited. Okay, sorry, I just nerded
I
out about.
love, no, I mean, you couldn't hear me on the audio, but my mouth was open just in delight because I geek out about that kind of thing all the time. I love dates and numbers, and I'm all about that. I love
Also, the
that you
Cubs
sync
made it
that.
to the like they almost won the World Series that year, which they hadn't won in like 108 years, and then they won in 2016, which they broke like 108-year dry spell, which is
So,
mind-boggling that they basically predicted the Cubs were going to win, which is super cool.
so my bitter Dodgers friends and I, we say that the whole like timeline of what's happened in the last 4 years kind of got jinxed by the Cubs not following that timeline. Had it happened in 2015, everything would have been fine. But because they won in 2016, it messed everything up. It shifted everything.
Well, also the Astros are cheating bastards, so there's that.
um, as you can tell, we're LA folk here. Please don't stop listening. So yeah, I love that this took place in 2026. I'm like, I'm very curious to see how this, I don't know, 2020 has been so crazy. I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if something crazy happens in a couple years. My takeaway from this film, besides like the just how insane everything visually, how everything was executed visually, I just think, God, is this still relevant? Is the story of like, the haves and the have-nots? Some say this is very pro socialism or communism, and others just see it for, the artistic mastery that it is. I don't know what your takeaway from this, Heather, was, but I still love it, even after finding out that it was Hitler's favorite film. It was I just it's so fascinating. It's so influential, and I would encourage everybody who's a film buff to watch it, whether you're into animation or classic films or just science fiction in general or just video games. Like I would say watch this. Watch the extended version, 2.5 hours. Don't let the time freak you out. What it's not the way it sounds. It goes by so quickly, I thought.
I think it went by very quickly, actually, and I went back and watched things over again
Hmm.
because the more you get into it, and silent films, you gotta kind of ease your way into it. It's like watching Shakespeare. The first scene or two when I'm watching, and I've been around a lot of Shakespeare, but when you go to watch a play, like you have to settle in to the
Hmm.
language and like get into a rhythm. Same thing with the silent film is you have to kind of, okay, what are the mechanics of this? How does it work? What's the style? You got to kind of settle in. So at first you're like, I don't know. You just give yourself a minute to settle in. And by the time we're at, midway through the film, the like intermezzo, as they said,
Yeah.
I mean, I am like hooked and like, fascinated. It's really, really groundbreaking. And then they go into like dream sequences, which I've never really seen that in another silent film, where it was so well executed that you understood that they were dream sequences without it saying dream sequence.
Exactly. Oh my God, that's such a good point, because like when she's, the whore of Babylon and she's going nuts, you could see it wasn't hard to follow that that's his nightmare. Like he's just let his imagination gone wild, which, when you're in love, you tend to go to the worst case scenarios sometimes, and it's very relatable. Not in terms of like his exact vision per se, but just letting your imagination go nuts. And it's like, dude, that's not what's happening at all. But you understood that was his mind going crazy because he was falling in harder and harder in love with her and couldn't understand why she was changing, and regressing to the person that he became enchanted with. And it was so good and executed really well. Or yes, I agree with you, you didn't need the explanation of this is a dream, card. So yeah, I 100% agree with you on that.
And my takeaway is that this is a when you really break it down to a basic story, it's a story that's told over and over again. Like you said, the haves, the have-nots. It's kind of a Romeo and Juliet story where, two different class of people fall in love. And, it's very repetitive themes that we see in storytelling all the time. And what do they say? Like, you break it down, there's really only 5 basic stories anyway. So, we've seen this story. It's still relevant. But for me, the relevance for still today is, you think of what's his name, Frederson, the main character.
Mm-hmm.
Freder, he's he's wealthy, he's affluent, he's the father of the basically the person who runs the world.
Mm-hmm.
But he just, the concept of not knowing how the have-nots live at all, just
Completely being ignorant to the
right,
problems
you're in your own little bubble of how your world works, and not like just having an awareness of the worldview or the circumstances or the tribulations that people are going through around you or below you, right? Like you're sitting at a red light and there's someone standing on the corner talking to themselves, and what has led that person to there? There's just so much. What is that person's life like? How do they day to day? And we just keep driving in our air conditioned cars sometimes, and we're just kind of oblivious to anyone else's struggles because we're so focused on our day to day. And we're lucky enough to have a lot of first world problems. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm really irritated because my phone doesn't want to connect to the Bluetooth in my car and stay connected, and it keeps hanging up on my calls, and I'm
Right.
taking it to the dealership tomorrow because what's wrong with this thing, and like
Right.
super first world problem. And I think that this is still that theme of he has this realization, just that horror moment, and literally like the image behind me, that machine, it turns into like a giant monster. He's realizing it for what it is, and it's just really fascinating. And like, you're looking at the work, this is an over dramatized version, but the people who make the city run, and also during this pandemic, super relevant, I just realized, the essential workers that have kept everything going. Well, the grocery store workers, the truck drivers, the nurses,
The bus
the doctors,
drivers, yeah.
the bus drivers, the people that clean the hospitals, the janitorial staff. Like, no one would be safe at the hospital if people weren't cleaning the rooms
Mm-hmm.
and the hallways. And like, the workers bees are the people that hold society together, and we don't pay attention to them. Like, whereas the
well
essential
said.
workers have always been the athletes or the politicians, or no, the people that are keeping the lights on are the real heroes. So that's my theme. That's my takeaway. Done.
Well said. And just to add to that, I would say if you're a huge fan of the 1920s in general, in terms of, the pardon me, the
I know what you're trying to
romanticized,
say.
the romanticized version of the 1920s. A lot of people wanted to start throwing Gatsby parties because, we're in the 20s. I'd say this is an accurate depiction of what the 20s were. Only a few people got to party. That was not what the entire decade was about. And this film brings it to light, brings what life was like between two world wars. And yes, it's dramatization and a little, overreacting here, but whatever, it's pantomime on film. I loved it. It was really interesting. My favorite, what you said, Heather, my favorite part was just Bridget Helms' ability to act in multiple ways without saying a word. Just the way she would contort her face in certain things to look angelic in one character, look, Antichrist
Demonic.
in another. Yeah, it was so fascinating. I think she might have won an Oscar. Back had the stars aligned with awards and the timeline of
Definitely. She was
Metropolis.
amazing. And she was deaf. She was a couple of the deadly sins. Like, she did all kinds of stuff. She was the Machine Man. Like, she is fantastic.
One last piece of trivia.
Job.
I read it. Yeah, she nearly fainted because there wasn't anywhere for her to breathe in that, I'm going to call it the C-3PO robot outfit. And she did everything. Like, they did hire stunt doubles, but they insisted on her being the one, and she stepped up and was up for the challenge. And I'm still a little upset that she's not listed as the star of this film.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're following Fredersen, but she's the star by far. She was the highlight acting performance, and he's that classic over dramatic, like you said, pantomime, silent movie acting. She's not. Also, his father was very much more modern film acting. He was very subtle. I was
loved
impressed
him
with his acting.
And one thing that Brett and I, while watching this film, like, that couldn't have been an accident. So for those who are familiar with Star Wars, A New Hope, he looked a lot like the general who is in charge of the Death Star, like that very bony facial structure. Like, to me, there's a very strong resemblance between the two, and I don't think that was an accident, especially knowing that George Lucas was a fan of this film. I would love to ask him, was that really, was it just C-3PO that you took from this? But I immediately saw the resemblance between the two, and so did Brad. And Star Wars fans, let me know if you did too, or if it was just me, and stop reading too much into things.
Okay, so obviously we highly recommend this. Really quick, what did you think of the trailer? We didn't talk about the trailer. We watched it right before we started recording. So what did you think of the trailer?
I like the trailer a lot, and I'd say if you still need a little bit of convincing, go ahead and check out the trailer. But I think it'd be more fun if you just went into it head first. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually think the trailer was really well done, and it doesn't give away too much of the plot. There's no talking, so it doesn't give any of those things away. I think it shows like the epic scale of the film. I think there's some trailers, like for instance, jumping ahead, like don't watch the trailer. It gives away too much of the movie.
So with that, yeah.
Yeah. But for this, like, go ahead, watch the trailer. But definitely check it out. Okay. Anything else you want to say about this lovely movie?
No, I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover and made our case, hopefully.
Awesome. Okay, so moving on to our second film. It's the one that I recommended. It is Them, like with an exclamation point, from 1954. So my mom and I used to love to watch classic horror movies like Godzilla's and like The Blob and, cheesy The Body Snatchers, like any of those films. And this one was always my favorite. I think it's like the quintessential, the best 50s sci-fi, especially like the nuclear monster films where like our atomic testing has created some kind of monster. And it was, according to one source, I don't know if it's true, but I read that it's like the first big bug, like a giant bug that was created film. So this came out in 1954. It's not rated. It was directed by Gordon Douglas, written by Ted Sheardaman. Sorry, I'm destroying that. Here's the plot. The earliest atomic test in New Mexico caused common ants to mutate into giant man-eating monsters that threaten civilization. Yeah, that's a perfect plot description. There you go. That's the movie. I love it. Okay, so starring James Whitmore, James Arness, Edmund Gwen, and Joan Weldon. And just so we have some reference of who these people are, James Whitmore, he was the
Brooks,
the police officer. Yes, right.
So I was like, oh my god, he's so young.
True. Yeah, so he played Brooks in Shawshank Redemption. And then do you know where James Arness is famous from?
I'm blanking at the moment. Tell me.
Gunsmoke.
Oh, okay.
Which I'll talk about later. And then Edmund Gwen, who was the dad scientist. Where do we know him from?
Tell us.
He was Santa Claus in the original Miracle on 34th Street.
I didn't know that.
That's all fun. I can see when I see him is Santa Claus.
Santa Claus.
And he has these like epic pronouncements about I know he's the only character in the film that has like philosophical thought about the destruction of the human species. And I'm like, Santa is telling me that giant ants are destroy.
That's awesome. Fun. That's a fun fact.
So I would say don't watch the trailer. I wish the trailer was half as long as it is, because the first half I was like, this is awesome. And then it started like showing too much of the movie.
It showed a lot. I would also say don't watch the trailer.
Just know like this is a 50s sci-fi horror thriller film, but it is one of the best, most well done ones that they're in existence that I've seen. Maybe some sci-fi horror buffs give me some other movies to check out, but a lot of the ones I've seen, like I've seen zippers, okay, like on costumes, like these were pretty well done. So what did you think of this film? I'm so excited to hear what you have to say.
So I'm gonna admit I had never heard of this film. I'm not a when you mentioned you watching The Blob, I'm like, 5-year-old me did not appreciate The Blob at all. It scared me for life. I hate like those type of old classic monster films. However, I am coming around to like the 80s type of horror films, the B movies of the 50s. And so what I was expecting of this one, I wasn't expecting it to have such a serious tone, which was pleasantly surprising. This was because as soon as you recommended them, I looked it up. I was like, oh Lord, is this gonna be, my only frame of reference is Starship Troopers and like The Simpsons, when they've clearly have been influenced by this film. This was really good. It was such a good film, and I'm not an enthusiast of this genre at all, and I'd be more open to watching more films from this genre. It excited me that it took place in LA. So before I get more into my thoughts of the film, so just for historical reference, what was going on in 1954. Ellis Island was closed as the point of immigration, which I didn't realize it happened that late. The hydrogen bomb was tested on Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. So we're really getting to the height of what life was like in the nuclear age, post World War II. Sports Illustrated printed its first issue. Under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. I was not aware it happened that late either.
Wow. I had no idea.
Swanson introduced TV dinners, and the first all electronic color TV made by RCA went on sale for $1,000, which in 1954 money, I mean, $1,000 is still a lot now. So, history buffs, do the conversion rate and tell me what that would be in the current pricing. So, some fun facts that I read about them. It was nominated for an Oscar for special effects, which I think it was well deserved. It did lose to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and for those of you who know, that's Disney money being pumped into, some underwater effects that were very groundbreaking. So it was just unfortunate timing, I think, for them. Any
Mm-hmm.
other year, I think it would have won, because I was very surprised at the detail of this. It wasn't, when you just see the pictures online without context, it kind of looks a little cheesy, but then once you're involved in the film, I try to think of like, oh wow, what would this have been like to watch in, I don't know if it was made in 3D. It looks like it could have been made for 3D at the time.
Well, actually, we'll talk about that in a
All
second.
right.
But I think I still am amazed at how much they put into practical effects, like building
Yes.
sets and these puppets, and it was really well done. Even honestly, sometimes by today's standards, if you go by practical effects and not computer generated images, I think it's still impressive. But especially when you think about it, them doing this in the 50s, it's that's one of the reasons I love this film. And like you said, it's not cheesy. It's not.
No.
You're expecting this genre to be cheesy, but this is actually a really good film that happens to take place around mutated ants.
And it could have been anything. Like that wasn't, the ants weren't the point. The point is, what is nuclear technology doing to the natural earth, and how is it gonna, protect itself against the people who were creating this?
Yeah, like what did our man's influence do, and what things have we affected that we don't think about? And then also it's just like it's almost like a mystery film on top of being like a thriller, because you don't see the first creature until like 28 minutes into the film.
And also, fun fact, only 3 ants were constructed.
I was going to talk about that. Yeah, there was like you only ever see 3 ants on screen at the same time, because they only built 3 puppets.
But like, unless you read that, it's not anything I would have really paid attention to.
No, I looked it up because I was like, how many ants did they have? And like they light them on fire. Like they had to have been careful about when they filmed that and how fire retardant these puppets are, and it's really impressive.
Do you have any information on the people who handled the flamethrowers? I found it really interesting that the actors...
I did, yeah. The flamethrowers used in the movies were like actually standard World War II weapons, and they were loaned by the U.S. Army, and the actors handling the weapons were World War II combat veterans who had used them in battle, and I thought that was so cool.
I did too. I loved it that they were taking it seriously. I mean, these aren't toys, and part of me wishes that this would have been filmed in color, just to get that threat, that effect of seeing fire just being blasted against this. I did read that it was filmed in black and white due to budget cuts, which is an issue that has kept coming up in some of the films we've discussed that were shot in black and white. However, same with like Roman Holiday. I think black and white worked for the most part.
I can't imagine. I think this movie in color would have been cheesy,
because it would have been very obvious what what was constructed, what the effects were. In black and white, it just completely, it blended everything much more seamlessly, and it felt a little more realistic, and I liked that.
Actually, the film was originally supposed to be filmed, like you said, in 3D and color. The color they ended up ditching, like you said, because of budget. But on the day they went to started filming, they did some tests with 3D, but then like the camera rig wasn't working, so they ended up scrapping the idea. But you can tell that some of the camera angles and stuff and pre-production plans stayed in place, because there's some elements that were done for 3D effects, like the flamethrowers, the fire coming directly at the camera, and just certain things in the film were designed to be made for 3D, which is really interesting. And I don't know how good 3D was in the 50s.
I think it was the blue and the red lens with the paper, that classic 3D glasses. I could see this working in 3D. For sure.
One thing I read, they actually did do the second, because you have to have 2 layers of film or 2 like different recordings. And I read in one thing I was reading that they actually did both, and then it's said that the second set of recordings are just like destroyed or gotten rid of when they change their mind, which is so sad, right? They had it existed, but it's gone.
I hate reading about that when film gets destroyed. Because I've read that too about like censorship, where certain scenes were cut because they were too racy and then they got burned. I'm like, what are you doing? Oh my God. That is a shame, because I would love to see this re-released in 3D.
Yeah. Oh man. Now
that would be so fun. Cool. Yeah.
We'll have to have someone, we gotta like start writing some emails. Like, we need to make this, do this, redo this in 3D. I'm sure they could figure it out.
Absolutely.
Okay, so other fun stuff. Speaking of the giant ants, so they were giant puppets. They were painted like a purplish green color, which again I think would have been kind of cheesy in actual color. And they were constructed and operated by unseen technicians, and they were supervised, we should give him credit, by Ralph Ayers, because I have a lot of respect for puppeteers and technicians. So that was really, I mean, it was really well done, honestly. It was super cool. Do you know what the Wilhelm scream is?
No, tell me.
Heard of it? Okay, so
sounds familiar.
It's that classic, like a guy falling or like from a height or being shot or knocked off something, where he does like a high pitched or like a guy scream like ah.
Oh, okay.
I don't do a good impression of it, sorry, but I look up, Google Wilhelm scream. Now it's been used in well over 400 films and TV series. Okay, like this is not only is it well used, but it's like an inside joke. It's like, this is a movie thing, right? The Wilhelm scream. Now, and when I watching it this time, I recognized it. I'd never really thought about it. I'm like, oh, the Wilhelm scream, and it shows up like 4 or 5 times at least. Now, I looked it up. It was only created like 3 years before this.
Oh, wow.
So this is one of the first films to actually use the Wilhelm scream. And it was created for a film 3 years earlier called Distant Drums, which I've never heard of or seen. And then just as background on the Wilhelm scream, it was named after okay, let me read this because I copy pasted this from somewhere. The Wilhelm scream is a stock sound effect that has been used in at least 400 films and TV series. The scream is often used when someone is shot, falls from a great height, or is thrown from an explosion. The sound is named after Private Wilhelm, a character in The Charge at Feather River, a 1953 Western, in which the character gets shot in the thigh with an arrow and is believed to be voiced by the actor and singer Sheb Wooley. And it's actually rumored that this film that it was named after, the Wilhelm scream, was like the 3rd time the effect was used.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So this was still like pretty new. It wasn't like a film trope already, but they definitely added to its influence for sure. Okay. But it was just cool because I was like, oh, the Wilhelm scream, and then realizing how early it was in the history of this. And now, like, I want you to Google it, and now you're going to hear it in so many things.
Okay, I will do that.
Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. And you've heard it. Like, when you Google it, you will know exactly what I'm talking about.
That's fun. I like that. Yeah, because to me, learning those type of secrets just make everything a little bit funner, and it enhances things that you normally wouldn't have picked up just as a casual viewer. So yeah, no, I'm all about little facts like that. I want to talk about the locations that this was filmed. So immediately you're surrounded by Joshua trees, and I'm aware that Joshua trees do exist in in the deserts further east from California and Arizona. So they do exist in New Mexico. However, I looked a little bit further into, so this was filmed in Palmdale, which is a high desert not too far from here.
Yeah, it's very obviously like a Southern California desert.
Yeah.
I know it's supposed to be set in New Mexico, but I'm like, yeah, that's
They don't have
awfully
those
familiar.
mountains. They don't have those mountains there. So the other part that made me, as a Los Angelino, made me really excited was the parts in downtown LA in the 50s. Made me really excited because I'm like, oh, that's a little, snapshot of what the city looked like back then. And reading into more of why LA, why was this shot here? Why was it written into the story? Because there's a lot of in film history, there's a lot of cities that are made to be something else, but they're still in LA. So I was wondering why they actually said Los Angeles instead of pretending it was another.
Set it in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm.
So it was originally supposed to be the underground was supposed to involve New York subways, which to me would have made a lot more sense. However, the New York City Transportation Secretary, William J. Daley, was horrified when he read the script for this. And he's like, that's not happening.
I read that. I thought that was so cool. So, I can't remember what I read, why they decided to do LA. It was another film. Man, there was another film that had happened in the drainage tunnels in Los Angeles, and the filmmakers were like, that's cool, and they decided to do it. I can't, I'll have to leave it in.
We'll add it to the notes, on the episode notes. But yeah, I thought that was really cool, and it sounds funny to think of someone being horrified at that, but then you have to think about there might have been something to what type of panic that might have created for a subway system that's heavily used, so that could have been a very real concern of why you shouldn't, kind of like what Jaws did for the water. Why would you create this, civilization threatening creature living in the subway that so many people use? So I can try to understand why it was shot down, but I think it would have been really interesting.
Definitely. I agree. I read that and I was like, ooh, that's cool. But it was, as an Angelino, it was exciting to have it be set there. Like you said, seeing the city in, a frozen moment in time, seeing what it looked like in the 50s, and then just that, and this, I don't know, feeling connected to it because it's part of our city, which is really
I agree.
Cool.
Oh, the other thing I do have to add is probably, we talked about the film logistics for Metropolis. It probably would have been a nightmare to try to shoot something like that in a New York City subway.
Totally. Yeah.
So
they would have been here in LA faking it anyway. Like you said, this is where the film industry is, since has been based since its creation. And even, more recently, the film industry, especially TV, has branched out to other cities, other countries. But originally, Hollywood was Hollywood, and this is where things were made. So that's just the way things were. But yeah, it would have been interesting. So maybe we just need to remake them and have it in 3D and have it in the New York subway system. And that's a good plan. All right, let's get on it.
I like it. I mean, there's so many remakes that are just so poorly executed. So it surprises me to be on board for a remake. But I think this would be amazing. I think it would be such an amazing remake. And not to overdo it with the CGI. I think that's where I get a little I would
be really excited if they built practical puppets.
Yes.
Keep everything practical, but redo it. Oh man, that'd be cool.
I think it would be very cool. I'm very surprised at myself for advocating a remake, but I think, and it's not to say that this was bad. I just think with modern technology, modern issues that are arising, with climate change and
yeah, where are our okay, we warned society about the nuclear era and the damage we could be doing, but where's all our climate change horror movies besides terrible ones like 2012. And
Was Deep Blue Sea one of those? Or no, that was a shark one.
I don't know. I'm not fond of those movies, so I don't really watch them. Like, that's not a genre I'm into, but
same.
Okay, we're classic movie nerds. Awesome. Okay,
no, but I'm really happy that you introduced me to this one because it's something I thought it was completely different. I thought it was gonna be quintessential bad, like it's so bad it's good. No. This is like just great. It's not what I thought it was gonna be at all.
Oh, I'm so glad you liked it. I know a couple like so bad it's good or to talk about, but I mean, have you watched like original Godzillas?
One of them, and I like I admire the stop motion part of it. So I'm into them. I haven't explored it. I haven't made the time to explore the genre further. I don't mean to sound like a snob. It was just something that just never really drew me in. I just thought it was either going to be B or that's it, in terms of the films that were made in the 40s, 50s, 60s, especially that post-nuclear era time frame. So now I feel
there's a lot of cheese, but this is quality. This is why it's my favorite. And most people haven't heard of this film. And it's such a weird, it's just called Them.
Exclamation point.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's a hidden gem. You gotta check it out.
I agree.
I was reading a couple things, just real quick. Walt Disney screened this movie because he was interested in James Arness. So this is the FBI agent.
Okay.
For playing Davy Crockett in his Disneyland TV series.
Oh, okay.
So he watched the movie and he was so impressed by Fess Parker. And now Fess Parker is the crazy Texan pilot, the guy they go visit in the like crazy house because he's flying a plane and he sees the giant ants.
Which, by the way, the feels of that scene, I'm not going to say anything more, but I'm like, I was not expecting to feel things while watching a movie about giant ants.
Right? Yeah, it sounds so bad, you guys, but just trust us, okay?
It's so really cool.
But Disney was so impressed by his performance that he hired him to be Davy Crockett in the Disneyland
That's so
TV
interesting.
series. But even though James Arness missed out on that, this is something I read. I don't know if it's true, but I'm gonna go with it. John Wayne saw the film and was so impressed with James Arness that he recommended him for the role of Marshall Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke, which ran for 20 years.
I didn't know that.
There were 20 freaking seasons of that show. Oh, I had no idea. I had
no idea either. Yeah,
because I was like, oh, James Arness, all Gunsmoke, like nostalgia of like watching.
Right.
When I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of Gunsmoke and Bonanza and Maverick.
Yeah.
It's so many. But anyway, I was like 20 seasons, and they're not even like. I was like, okay, is there some short seasons? No, they're full of Gunsmoke. Like, holy cow. Anyway, I mean, I like Gunsmoke, but I'm not down for 20 seasons of Gunsmoke. And then my favorite piece of trivia that I had no idea, and I've seen this movie a lot of times, and I'm about to rewatch it to find this out. Someone had a small uncredited part in this film as a U.S. Army Staff Sergeant. He's the person that, you know how they're like the cables coming in and it's like,
oh yeah.
Okay, the guy passes it to the lady like, this is something they're looking for upstairs. Do you know who that is?
I want to say I read this. Remind me.
Leonard freaking Nimoy.
I did read this, and I want to rewatch it for the same reason.
A baby Leonard Nimoy, and I never caught that. And I'm shocked. But I was like, what? And I had to go back and like I found images and like, yeah, it's Leonard Nimoy. He's not even credited. He's a super baby. I didn't look up what year he was born, so I don't know how old he was, but he looks like he's like 19 or something. I mean, baby Leonard Nimoy, and I'm gonna go rewatch them just for that.
It's a rewatchable movie, shockingly. And for those who know me, I say shockingly because I just, when it comes to certain genres, I don't have that urge to rewatch something that's either a monster movie or, I mean, I wouldn't, this is definitely sci-fi horror adjacent in terms of the type of monster movie that this, I in my mind was categorized with. I was very wrong, and I would love to watch this again with someone who hasn't seen it or heard it, and I'm gonna just keep on paying it forward.
Oh, heard it. You just reminded me. Okay, the sound that the ants make, which
Yes.
to me sounds like a car with a bad serpentine belt. Like you hear the car screeching down the highway. It's a kind of, that's my least favorite part about this film, is it's a cool sound, but it gets old. And it does create that suspense, but sometimes it's just like a little much.
Yeah.
That's my one complaint. The ants make this very specific sound, and I was wondering like what the heck that is. And I read the sounds of the ants are a bunch of different animals put together, like bird voice tree frogs.
That's what I read. Yeah. That's what I read.
A wood thrush, a hooded warbler, a red-bellied woodpecker, and apparently these were all recorded at Indian Island, Georgia on April 11th, 1947, by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Just to be really specific, according to that article that I read, that's where the sound came from, which is, wow, they really went all out when they could have just recorded a car
right
with mechanical failure.
But I like that they kept it organic and just enhanced, and it goes with the science of, well, what if everything about nature is enhanced to a point that wasn't meant to be the size that it is because of something that humans caused. And yeah, you know, this could have been any animal, this could have been any insect, this could have been a bee or a flea or whatever.
Well, there's a bunch of copycat films. Like I said, this was like the first giant nuclear
of its
bug,
kind, yeah.
But they did a whole bunch of them. Also, I read when this was released in Sweden, it was the title was translated weird, and if you translate it to English, it's like giant spiders.
But it's not, yeah.
Completely misrepresenting. Like everything I read was like, oddly enough, and it was released in Sweden, it was entitled Giant Spiders. It's like, oops, someone messed up.
And one of my thoughts, like, once I was really involved in like, I went with it. I'm like, all right, I'm going with it. This is pretty amazing. And I was trying to really put myself in the audience shoes, having lived through seeing cities being obliterated by atomic bombs, kids having to do, you know, atomic drills, that, you know, bomb drills at school, just not knowing how badly things could escalate, to be in an audience and just not know what the possibilities of the effects were. I could see this being even scarier than just kind of like a food for thought film for modern audiences.
Yeah, I think this was actually like a pretty well done horror movie at the time. It's got a lot of suspense, especially like the sound we were just talking about. They really do use it to build up the suspense of what these, because you know, we're you know, spoilers, we told you they're giant ants, but if you go into it completely blind, you don't know what the creature is. And like I said, you don't see one until, and you still don't know what it is until they explain it to you. But you know, it's more than half an hour into this film, which is only like 94 minutes or something. So you're like a third of the way in, and then you finally start to see it. So there's a lot of suspense, a lot of buildup, and then they really raise the stakes repeatedly with this science. And they use actual science,
well, just like explaining how quickly this could multiply. I mean, I got terrified because that could be applied to anything. You know, even like when you have vermin in a home, or like, you know, whether it's termites or mice or ants, whatever, like just knowing just one, how quickly that, think of it on a larger scale. I could easily lose myself in this film of the what ifs, and oh my god, that's terrifying.
Can you imagine if hummingbirds were like 15 times their size? How terrifying they would be, because they're
Yes.
super fast and aggressive, and like they will, like I've seen them like fight each other. They're very aggressive, intense birds. Like imagine if they were giant. It would be
Right.
terrifying.
And I mean, I haven't seen this film, the film I'm about to mention, in a really long time. But what I do remember about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is that the ants were like the friendly ones. And I think it was a spider that was the threat. But either way, it was still terrifying because he looks so ugly and choppery, and they're not cute. And so had I seen this before, I'm curious, for those who had seen them before something like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids or Stormship Troopers came out. I don't know. I would love to have a discussion with adults that lived through both film releases, and to see how that changed, if it brought back any memories of, oh my god, I remember how I felt when I watched, because I mean, I see the screen in your background, Heather. That's creepy. And I think, okay,
Yeah,
so
I'm about to get eaten by a giant ant. Yeah.
and it's gonna get me at the waist and just chop me in half.
And inject you with tons of like formic acid,
Whatever.
which I had no idea that ants did that. I mean, they actually, like, you learn a lot about ants in this movie. It's educational as well as entertaining.
Well, yeah, it just made me think of other films that I've watched that have sort of this trope that is brought back in modern films. I mean, there's that other one, Eight-Legged Freaks, that I haven't seen, but now I'm curious to explore some of the modern ones.
We should watch
Based on-
Sharknado. I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
But no, I mean, I've learned something new with this film. It's pried open a possible door to, I'm not gonna say I'm gonna go nuts exploring this genre, but this was an excellent discovery, and I'm so happy you introduced it to me.
Oh, yay. I'm so glad you liked it. And thank you for Metropolis, because that's like, I mean, if you're into film at all, you have to watch it. You don't know anything about film until you watch something that influenced all of, I mean, that like them is influenced by Metropolis. It was the godfather of sci-fi, and I mean, just groundbreaking filmmaking at its time. It's really impressive.
Before we wrap up, can I just mention two things? I realize that these two films have really strong women at like the center of these plots.
Yes. And also, speaking of that, reminds me of a comment that my friend made when we were watching them. There's a woman scientist, and she is a very strong character, but he goes, it's interesting how sexism is used as a plot device. And I'm like, it is in so many movies. Like, it's literally used as a plot device. Like, she's strong because she's going to overcome sexism. Like, everyone's pointing out sexism, but then they're not actually doing anything about it. It's really interesting.
One line that really stood out to me in them was when the cops were trying to, get the answers from the scientists on like what's really happening, what the stakes are. And I believe it was the father who said, like, you could call her miss if you don't have to call her doctor. I'm like, oh my god, that's right. We're still in the 50s where, or I forgot if she was like, you don't have to refer to me as doctor if it makes you feel better.
If it makes you uncomfortable.
Yes,
yeah,
that's what it was.
Yes. Yeah,
like,
it's pretty gross.
I'm like, okay, well, that's a reminder of like, this was still the 50s. You could have your doctorate in your field of expertise and you're still seen as a skirt. It's very telling of the times.
And from the moment you see her character, I mean, it's literally like she's stepping out of an army plane, which apparently was an actual like 2-star general army plane.
Oh, wow.
Used. But she's stepping out and you just see her legs. She's wearing a skirt and the guys like stop.
They're like,
and are
oh,
checking her
you
out.
know.
Yeah. I mean, she's literally like a piece of meat from the moment that she starts. And it's like, you know, trying, like you said, trying to take her seriously because she's literally a doctor. She's a very educated, gorgeous, strong woman who's like, no, I'm going to go down in that hole with you guys. Like, what? No.
Yes.
She's a badass. Like,
I loved
vamp.
her. And something else that made me think about filming this, especially knowing that they were, I mean, it's very obvious they're filming in the desert, and I don't think there's any makeup or effects done. I think everyone was really sweating. Those suits look wool and heavy AF. I read that she fainted a couple of times, which wouldn't surprise me if you're in this full wool suit, not being, you know, shaded. I don't know how many takes that must have. I mean, it looked like it was filmed in the day, and it didn't really look like it was filmed in a sound studio.
Yeah, no, I think they were actually out in the desert. I didn't know that. That's really interesting, and it sucks for her, man.
Yeah,
she was awesome though. Like Joan Weldon, she's awesome. You got to watch this film just for the strong, powerful women or woman. There's just one.
Oh, women in the two films. Oh, yeah. I mean, same for Metropolis. I mean, you see some of the female extras really, but she's the core of the film in the same way of like how the machine runs the city. And yeah, I don't know. It was unintentional that we paired these two together that revolve around such strong women, and I love it.
That's one of my favorite things about this experience with this podcast is that we're blindly recommending movies to each other that the other person hasn't seen, and it's really fun to see how they overlap.
Yes.
When we have no idea what we're going into, we just kind of we picked sci-fi and we went with it, and it's really cool. And these are, you know, way different genres in a sense, even though it's under the sci-fi heading. They're totally different time periods and styles, and it's there's a lot of similarities. It's really cool.
Yeah, so I mean, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, that's I think about it. I'm excited. What are we doing next time?
Gone with the Wind. We're gonna dive into our first epic, and I say first because there's several to be talked about, but we want to take our time with this one and get into our first intermission required film. So I'm very excited to talk about that one. Yes, I think it's still topical as of recent times, and also R.I.P. Olivia de Havilland. So I'll be excited to dive into that one.
Yeah, and it recently came up in with that controversy we've talked about, where they, you know, are talking about removing it, but we'll get into all of that. Yeah, I'm excited. I haven't seen this movie since I was a kid, and
wow, okay.
I had a love-hate relationship with it. My parents took me to go see it in the theaters when I was like 6, which
That's young.
Yeah, it's a really long movie. And I can normally sit through long stuff, but it was rough.
Yeah.
So I would like to rewatch this with adult eyes. So I'm excited.
Oh, I think that's gonna be an exciting one. So make sure to check out our website at moviemenupodcasts.com. Follow us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Until next time,
stay classy.